The government may have managed to stave off its first real rebellion after backtracking on plans to cut personal independence payments. Ministers were expected to freeze the benefit, but a looming backbench revolt seems to have forced them into a U-turn. Significant cuts to the welfare budget will, though, still be announced next week. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
Tina, a social worker, receives personal independence payments, or PIPs, to help towards the extra costs of her mobility problems. So even the possibility of the government freezing PIPs next year had been a real concern.
That must make you quite anxious when there's talk about possibly freezing PIP and it not going up in line with inflation.
It makes me feel very, very worried, because I feel if that's frozen, what's going to happen next? But in terms of the immediate thing it's like all the bills are rising. You know, I'm already not having my heating on during the winter.
Ministers have been looking for ways to control the ballooning disability and welfare benefits bill.
We've got a system in this country where those who need support don't always receive the support they need, especially if they're needing help to get back to work, and where the welfare bill continues to rise beyond sustainability. And we want to make sure that we've got a welfare system in this country that is fair, kind, compassionate, acts as a safety net for those who can't work and a springboard back to work for those who can.
But apparently, in response to the reaction from Labour MPs visiting Downing Street last week, the proposal to freeze PIPs has now been dropped.
Do you think the government was facing a rebellion from backbench MPs like yourself if they'd gone ahead?
I certainly know that I couldn't vote for anything which would make my constituents, my disabled constituents, poorer when they're already struggling. We've got a very high cost of living here in York, and the thought that people would struggle even further, I have to say, I just could not vote for that. That's outside of my moral compass.
The government is still set to propose other difficult reforms to disability benefits, like tightening the criteria for new claimants, alongside measures to make it easier for people on benefits to get back into work.
So, Carl, the government's still likely to be proposing things that many of its own MPs will be very unhappy with.
Yeah, because this is one of the most difficult things in the government's in-tray. Sickness and disability benefits were costing us about £40 billion a year before the pandemic. By the end of this decade, we're looking at something like £100 billion a year. Now, there's disagreement about why that huge increase is happening. Increasingly, it's young people who are qualifying. Increasingly, it's because of mental health conditions. In fact, somewhat controversially today, Wes Streeting suggested that doctors were over-diagnosing mental health conditions. Campaigners will argue that it's actually because mental health services and treatments are under-resourced. But one thing that everyone can agree on is that this kind of huge increase is ultimately unsustainable. So on Tuesday, the government is bringing forward its proposals. We know that they will be tightening up and making it more difficult to qualify for some things. We know that there will be a guarantee that allows people to try work without losing benefits, but there will not be that freeze of PIPs.